Central Queensland is defined less by landmarks than by distance. Beyond the coastal cities, the land opens into long, uninterrupted plains. Low scrub stretches toward a horizon that appears fixed and unreachable. Spinifex grass forms pale clusters across red soil. The air carries heat without movement. Shade is scarce and temporary. Roads run straight for hundreds of kilometers, interrupted only by cattle grids, dry creek beds, and the occasional road sign weathered by dust. Towns are separated by hours of driving. Winton, a small settlement in the state's interior, sits within this wide expanse. Its population is modest. Services are limited. Outside its perimeter, pastoral land extends in all directions. Fences mark cattle stations that occupy vast tracts of land, often measured in thousands of square kilometers. Rainfall in this region is irregular. Summers bring extreme temperatures that can exceed 40 degrees Celsius. Water sources are unreliable and often seasonal. Travelers depend on vehicles not only for transportation but for survival. Mechanical failure or disorientation can become critical within a single afternoon. In this landscape, there is little to interrupt exposure. The sky remains clear for long periods. The ground reflects heat upward. Sound does not carry far. It is a region where survival depends on preparation. Distance here is not abstract. It is physical, measurable, and indifferent. In January 2006, Ricky Magee was traveling through Queensland by car. He was 35 years old at the time. Originally from Victoria, he had worked various jobs, including laboring and seasonal employment. He had experience living in regional Australia, but was not trained in wilderness survival. Like many who travel long distances across the country, he relied on established highways and the assumption that settlements, though far apart, were reachable by vehicle. He had been driving north through inland Queensland, moving between towns connected by long, isolated roads. The interior highways are built for endurance rather than traffic. Vehicles pass infrequently. Fuel stations can be separated by hundreds of kilometers. Drivers are expected to carry water, supplies, and emergency planning. For most, the journey passes without incident. Magee later reported that during his drive he stopped near Winton and accepted a drink from a motorist who had offered assistance. According to his account, he began to feel unwell soon afterward. His memory of the following period was fragmented. Authorities were unable to conclusively confirm the circumstances surrounding this part of the event. What is documented is that he lost consciousness and later awoke alone in remote scrubland. When he regained awareness, he was no longer on a main highway. The terrain around him was unfamiliar. His vehicle was not immediately visible. There were no structures in sight. The vegetation consisted of low shrubs and coarse grass. The ground was uneven and dry. He did not possess extensive survival equipment. Like many drivers, he carried limited personal supplies. There was no satellite phone. There was no emergency beacon. Water was not readily available. The distance from established roads was not yet clear to him. At first, disorientation dominated the situation. He later described confusion about direction and time. The sun was high. The heat intensified through the day. Without clear landmarks, navigation became uncertain. In flat country, perspective is misleading. What appears near can require hours to reach. The interior road system of Queensland includes sealed highways and smaller, unmarked tracks that branch into cattle stations. It is possible to turn off a major road and quickly enter sparsely monitored land. Once beyond the main route, traffic declines sharply. A person on foot becomes difficult to locate. Visibility may extend far across open land, yet slight undulations and vegetation conceal movement at ground level. Search efforts had not yet begun because no alarm had been raised. His absence was not immediately recognized. For travelers without scheduled check-ins, disappearance can go unnoticed for days. The environment he found himself in was not mountainous or dramatic. It was level and repetitive. That sameness complicates orientation. In extreme heat, decision-making deteriorates quickly, especially when hydration is limited. At this stage, The situation had not yet formed into a defined survival crisis. It was still a problem of location. He needed to determine where he was and how to reach a road. The assumption that help could be reached on foot is common in open country. In many cases, it proves incorrect. By the time he began to move through the scrub, the separation from established routes had already occurred. The distance between him and regular traffic was growing, though he did not yet understand how far. When Ricky Meggie regained full awareness, the separation from the highway had already happened. He later stated that he woke beneath scrub vegetation with limited memory of how he arrived there. The main road was not visible. There were no signs of passing vehicles. The land around him was dry and open, broken by low bushes and coarse grass. The sky was clear. The temperature was already rising. He began walking. At first, the objective was simple: find a road. In inland Queensland, highways are often the only reliable link between settlements. Meggie believed that if he moved in a consistent direction, he would eventually encounter traffic. The terrain did not appear impassable. It seemed navigable on foot. What he did not know was the extent of the distance between him and major routes. The region around Winton includes large cattle stations separated by fencing and unmarked access tracks. Without a clear sense of orientation, movement can carry a person deeper into isolation rather than toward assistance. As the hours passed, the physical strain became apparent. The heat intensified near midday. Shade was limited to sparse shrubs that provided minimal relief. His mouth dried quickly. There was no visible surface water. Seasonal creeks in this region often remain dry for long periods. Groundwater is inaccessible without tools. At some point, he recognized that he could not continue walking indefinitely. The effort required more energy than he could afford. Dehydration begins subtly, but accelerates in high temperatures. Headache, dizziness, and weakness follow. Decision-making narrows. He stopped moving and remained near a patch of thicker scrub. The shift from traveler to stranded individual occurred gradually, not in a single dramatic moment. There was no storm, no visible disaster. The isolation became unavoidable through accumulation distance, heat, uncertainty. By the end of the first full day, he had not located a road. The assumption that one lay just beyond the horizon was no longer reliable. The landscape offered no signal of direction. The problem had changed. It was no longer about reaching a destination. It was about enduring exposure. By the second day, movement had become inefficient. Ricky Meggie recognized that walking under direct sun was accelerating his decline. The temperature during January in inland Queensland routinely exceeds 40 degrees Celsius. Without water, the body cannot regulate heat effectively. Sweat diminishes, skin dries. The pulse increases, energy falls sharply. He shifted strategy from travel to containment. The scrubland around him included low shrubs and spinifex grass. There were no large trees. Shade existed only in fragments, small enough that it moved as the sun crossed the sky. He selected an area where several bushes clustered together and began arranging branches to increase cover. Using fallen limbs and vegetation, he constructed a shallow windbreak and overhead screen. It was not a structure in the architectural sense. It was a barrier against direct sunlight. The shelter reduced exposure, but did not eliminate heat. Air temperature remained high. The ground retained warmth into the evening. Nights in the outback can cool quickly, but in summer the relief is limited. Insects emerged after sunset. Sleep came in short intervals. Water remained the central problem. He searched the immediate area for signs of moisture. There were no visible streams. The soil was dry and compact. In some arid regions, roots or shallow digging may reveal damp ground. In this case, attempts to locate water by scraping at the soil did not produce a sustainable source. The land had not recently received rain. He began consuming insects. Grasshoppers were present in the vegetation. They provided minimal nutrition but some moisture. He also consumed small lizards when he was able to catch them. These actions were not calculated for dietary balance. They were immediate responses to hunger and the body's demand for intake. Protein and fluid from small animals slowed deterioration, but could not reverse dehydration. He limited movement to conserve energy. During peak daylight hours, he remained within the shelter's shade. In early morning or late afternoon, he walked short distances to scan for landmarks or elevation changes that might indicate a road or fence line. The landscape remained uniform. Over time, his physical state deteriorated. Dehydration reduces blood volume. Standing becomes difficult. Muscles cramp, lips crack, vision can blur. Meggie later described weakness severe enough that walking upright required effort. He lost significant body weight over the course of the ordeal. Medical assessments after rescue confirmed extreme dehydration and substantial weight loss, estimated at more than 15 kilograms. The mind adjusts in stages. At first, there is urgency. Then there is calculation. Eventually, there is reduction. The day becomes segmented into basic objectives. Remain shaded. Attempt to locate water. Consume what is available. Rest. Long-term planning narrows to the next hour. Time perception shifts under these conditions. Without external markers, days merge. Sunrise and sunset become the primary indicators of continuity. The absence of clocks or routine obligations alters the sense of progression. The body measures time through fatigue and thirst. He attempted to orient himself using the sun. In open country, east to west movement can be approximated by observing sunrise and sunset positions. However, without knowing the nearest road's direction, this method provides limited advantage. A consistent heading does not guarantee contact with infrastructure. In large cattle stations, distances between fence lines can span many kilometers. At intervals, he left the shelter and walked further than before. These excursions were increasingly difficult. Weakness forced him to stop and rest frequently. Eventually, he began crawling when standing became too exhausting. The ground's surface was abrasive. Spinifex grass contains sharp points that cut exposed skin. His clothing offered limited protection. He returned repeatedly to the constructed shelter because it represented control. It was the only fixed element in an otherwise uniform environment. Remaining in one place increased the theoretical chance that searchers might locate him. However, no formal search had yet been launched on a large scale, as his disappearance had not been immediately reported with precise coordinates. Cloud cover remained minimal. Without rainfall, there was no opportunity to collect water from pooled surfaces. In some survival situations, individuals extract moisture from plant roots or condensation. In this region and season, such sources were insufficient. He rationed movement, not food. Food sources were unpredictable but secondary. Water scarcity defined the crisis. The human body can survive weeks with minimal caloric intake, but only days without hydration, particularly in extreme heat. As the days passed, physical decline became visible in his limbs. Muscles reduced in volume. Skin tightened across bone. Standing required deliberate effort. His voice, when he attempted to call out, was weak. Despite deterioration, he maintained the pattern. Morning movement, midday shelter, evening scan of the horizon. The repetition served a structural purpose. It preserved decision-making in an environment that encouraged passivity. There were no dramatic shifts in weather, no sudden storms. The outback did not change in response to his presence. It remained constant. By the end of this period, his capacity to relocate himself over distance had significantly diminished. Survival had become stationary endurance rather than active navigation. By the middle of the ordeal, movement had become secondary to survival in place. Ricky Meggie's routine narrowed to repetition. He rose with first light, when temperatures were lowest. During these early hours, he attempted short walks in a single direction, hoping to intersect a fence line or track. He did not travel far. Weakness forced frequent pauses. The ground, uneven and covered with spinifex, slowed progress. Each step required effort that his body struggled to supply. When the sun climbed higher, he returned to the shelter, constructed from branches and scrub. Shade shifted throughout the day. He adjusted the placement of vegetation to maintain coverage. The structure offered only partial protection, but it reduced direct exposure. Without it, heat stress would have accelerated. He continued consuming insects and small reptiles when possible. Catching them required patience rather than speed. By this stage, sudden movement caused dizziness. His coordination had declined. He conserved energy by waiting rather than pursuing. Speech was no longer useful. There was no one within hearing distance, calling out expended moisture. He limited unnecessary vocalization. The psychological dimension changed gradually. At first, there had been an assumption that a road lay nearby. That assumption faded. The possibility of rescue without self-movement became abstract. Yet he maintained orientation attempts. He used the sun's path to hold a consistent direction during short walks. Even when progress was minimal, structure remained important. Time blurred. Without external reference points, he measured days through sunrise and sunset alone. Hunger receded behind thirst. The sensation of dryness dominated awareness. His tongue swelled. Swallowing became painful. Standing upright required deliberate concentration to avoid collapse. On several occasions, he moved farther from the shelter in search of any sign of infrastructure. The landscape remained unchanged. No fence posts appeared. No vehicle tracks crossed his path. Returning to the shelter required more strength than leaving it. His body weight continued to fall. Muscles weakened visibly. The distance he could travel shortened each day. Eventually, walking upright became intermittent. He began crawling when necessary, using forearms and knees to move across the ground. The effort left abrasions on exposed skin. Despite decline, the routine persisted. Morning movement, midday shelter, evening scan, night rest in intervals. There was no dramatic turning point within these days. The change was incremental. Endurance replaced expectation. The goal was no longer to solve the situation quickly, but to persist through another cycle of heat and darkness. By the 9th or 10th day, Ricky Maggie's condition had become critical. Dehydration reached a severe stage. The body, deprived of water, could no longer maintain normal circulation. Blood pressure dropped, muscles cramped. Cognition slowed. He became unable to maintain balance for more than brief periods. Standing and walking upright were often impossible. Crawling replaced walking, though it demanded energy he did not have. Every movement brought pain. Skin had dried, cracked, and darkened in patches from prolonged sun exposure. His energy reserves were depleted. Food intake, limited to insects and small lizards, offered minimal calories and moisture. Fatigue dominated every action. Limbs trembled. Simple tasks, rearranging branches, adjusting shade, collecting small insects required conscious effort. Sleep was fragmented, occasionally lasting only a few minutes at a time, as heat, thirst, and discomfort persisted through day and night. Time had lost all meaning. The sun's rise and fall remained the only markers of continuity. Each day merged with the next. The body responded instinctively. Conserve energy, maintain shade, minimize exposure. There was no movement toward escape. The distance to the nearest road remained unknown, invisible, and unreachable without external assistance. Mental clarity was affected. He experienced periods of confusion and slowed reaction. Decisions that had previously been deliberate and cautious became difficult. Attempting to rise from the ground could result in dizziness or near collapse. The environment remained indifferent. Spinifex grass and scrub offered no guidance, no relief, no comfort. Despite weakness, he persisted in the established pattern. Limited movement in early hours, return to shelter during peak heat, minimal activity during evening. The routine itself was a method of survival. It reduced unnecessary expenditure of energy and minimized exposure to heat. There were no dramatic failures or accidents. No storm, fire, or predator intervened. The Outback did not accelerate his decline. It simply provided conditions that made survival dependent on patience and endurance. By this stage, rescue or death were equally possible outcomes. The human body at this level of dehydration can endure only a limited number of days, particularly in extreme temperatures. Yet, The persistence of structured behavior and incremental attempts to find water or signs of life sustained him long enough for eventual discovery. On the 12th day, Ricky McGay was discovered. A worker from a nearby cattle station was performing routine checks along a fence line. The station covered thousands of square kilometers of sparsely vegetated land. From a distance, the worker noticed movement near a cluster of spinifex and low shrubs. Approaching cautiously, he found Maggie lying on the ground, weak, dehydrated, and partially immobile. Medical examination confirmed severe dehydration and exhaustion. He was unable to walk without assistance. Lips were cracked, skin dry, and body weight had dropped significantly. His pulse was weak but steady. There were abrasions from crawling and prolonged contact with coarse vegetation. He was transported to the nearest medical facility in Winton. There, fluids and basic care were administered to stabilize his condition. The treatment was methodical: rehydration, monitoring of vitals, and slow restoration of physical function. At no point did the environment or rescue involve dramatics. There were no storms, no sudden intervention. The discovery was a quiet, procedural event carried out as part of routine station work. The separation from roads and settlements, combined with extreme heat and lack of water, had produced a fragile human condition. The medical response focused solely on restoration of physiological stability. This marked the end of the ordeal. Survival was confirmed through measured observation, not celebration. The landscape remained unchanged, indifferent to the human presence it had constrained for nearly 2 weeks. Ricky Maggie's survival highlights the indifference of the outback and the limits of human endurance. The Australian interior does not adjust for human presence. Heat, distance, and isolation are constants. Water scarcity, uneven terrain, and sparse vegetation create conditions in which even short periods, without preparation, become life-threatening. Survival in these circumstances depended on minimal movement, utilization of shade, limited food, and the preservation of energy. Routine and small decisions, rather than heroics, allowed him to endure. His discovery was contingent on circumstance, a worker passing near his shelter, not a planned rescue. Historically, such incidents underscore the fragility of human life in extreme environments and the importance of preparation when traversing remote areas. The landscape continues unchanged, vast and quiet. The event leaves no drama, only measured observation. A human body sustained against natural indifference, and a reminder of endurance in isolation. The story concludes in silence,